What if everything we thought we knew about history was incomplete, hidden beneath the sands of time, tucked away in forgotten caves, or sealed inside crumbling monasteries, lie sacred texts that could shatter long-held beliefs and rewrite the story of humanity? These aren't just old books, they're time capsules, preserving voices silenced for centuries, ideas deemed too dangerous to survive, and truths that defy the narratives we've accepted. Think about the last time you questioned a story you'd been told your whole life. Now imagine that feeling multiplied across entire civilizations, religions, and systems of knowledge. That's the power these ancient manuscripts hold. Picture this. A shepherd in the 1940s stumbles upon clay jars in a cave near the Dead Sea, unaware he's just uncovered texts that would force scholars to reconsider the origins of Judaism and Christianity. Or laborers in Egypt, digging for fertilizer in 1945, accidentally unearthing a library of Gnostic Gospels that presented a radically different version of early Christian thought. These aren't fictional discoveries, they're real moments when the ground literally shifted beneath our understanding of the past. And here's the thing, we may only have found a fraction of what's still waiting to be discovered. Every unearthed manuscript is like finding a missing piece of a puzzle we didn't even know was incomplete. This journey isn't just about dusty scrolls or faded ink, it's about the human obsession with truth, the lengths we've gone to preserve it, and the even greater lengths others have taken to suppress it. Across continents and millennia, from the clay tablets of Mesopotamia to the codices of medieval monks, sacred texts have been copied, hidden, burned, and rediscovered in a dramatic dance of survival. What secrets might still be out there? What revelations lie buried beneath centuries of dust, just waiting to challenge our modern assumptions? As we explore these lost manuscripts together, we're not just uncovering history, we're rediscovering parts of ourselves, the questions that have haunted humanity since the beginning. The past isn't as settled as we've been led to believe, and the most astonishing chapters may still be waiting to be read. There's something irresistible about the idea of lost manuscripts, like whispers from another time, daring us to listen. They tug at our imagination because they represent more than forgotten words on a page. They're fragments of voices that were silenced, ideas that threatened the status quo, or knowledge so advanced it was dismissed as heresy. Think about the Nag Hammadi library, those Gnostic Gospels discovered in Egypt. Buried for 1600 years, they contained spiritual teachings that early church leaders tried to erase. When they resurfaced, they didn't just add to history, they contradicted it, revealing a time when Christianity was far more diverse than the single narrative that later dominated. This allure isn't just about religion. Take the Antiquity mechanism, a 2,000-year-old device found in a shipwreck off Greece. For decades, historians assumed it was a simple astronomical tool until modern imaging revealed gears and inscriptions suggesting it could predict eclipses and track planetary movements. Here was proof that ancient civilizations possessed technological sophistication we never credited them with. It's as if history itself is a puzzle, and every recovered manuscript or artifact is a piece that forces us to redraw the edges. What makes these discoveries so electrifying is the tension they create between what we think we know and what might still be hidden. Consider the Voinish manuscript, that cryptic 15th century book written in an unbreakable code, filled with illustrations of plants that don't exist and celestial charts that defy interpretation. For centuries, it's baffled linguists, historians, and even codebreakers from world wars. Is it an elaborate hoax, a lost language, or something far stranger? The fact that we still don't know keeps the mystery alive, proving that some secrets refuse to give up their truths easily. This obsession with lost knowledge isn't just academic, it's deeply human. We're drawn to these texts because they challenge the idea that history is settled. They remind us that the past isn't a single story but a tapestry of competing voices, some louder, some deliberately erased. Every time a new manuscript surfaces, it's not just about rewriting a timeline. It's about reclaiming the diversity of thought that existed before dogma, politics, or time itself narrowed the record. And that's why the search continues, because somewhere out there, another fragment waits, ready to unsettle everything we thought we knew. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was like turning on a light in a room we'd only ever glimpsed through a keyhole. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd tossing stones into a cave near Qumran heard the sound of shattering pottery, a moment that would send shockwaves through religious scholarship. What he'd found weren't just old scraps of parchment, but nearly 1,000 texts preserved in the dry desert air, some dating back to the 3rd century before the Common Era. These weren't simply copies of what we already knew. Among the fragments were entire books of the Hebrew Bible older by 1,000 years than any previously known versions, alongside prayers, commentaries, and community rules from a Jewish sect that history had nearly forgotten. What makes these scrolls so revolutionary is how they expose the living, breathing diversity of ancient Jewish thought before it became codified. Take the famous Isaiah scroll. Its text matches almost word for word with later versions, proving remarkable consistency in transmission. But then there's the Book of Jeremiah, where the Dead Sea version differs significantly from the traditional text, showing editors actively shaping scripture centuries after its composition. Even more startling are the completely new texts like the War Scroll, depicting an apocalyptic battle between the sons of light and sons of darkness, or the community rule that reads like a manual for a radical religious commune. These writings reveal a Judaism far more varied than the single tradition that survived. Scholars were particularly stunned by how these texts reframe our understanding of early Christianity. The scrolls use phrases like teacher of righteousness and sons of light that echo New Testament language, suggesting shared roots rather than separate origins. Some passages even anticipate Christian concepts: a messianic figure suffering for sins, a ritual meal of bread and wine, but in purely Jewish contexts. It's as if we're seeing the raw materials from which multiple religions would later build. Perhaps most fascinating is what the scrolls don't contain. There's no mention of key rabbinic figures like Hillel or Shammai, no trace of the Pharisees or Sadducees who dominate later texts. Instead, we meet the Essenes, a group barely mentioned in historical records, but who may have been preserving alternate traditions. Their library forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: history belongs to the preservers, not necessarily to the majority. What we consider mainstream Judaism and Christianity might simply be the versions that outlasted others, not the only ones that ever existed. The Dead Sea Scrolls remind us that sacred texts aren't frozen in time but are snapshots of ongoing conversations. Every time scholars decipher another fragment, it's like overhearing an ancient debate about the nature of God, morality, and community, one where multiple answers once coexisted. That cave near the Dead Sea didn't just preserve leather and ink. It saved voices that were nearly erased, inviting us to reconsider how much richer our spiritual heritage might have been before some stories were chosen and others left to crumble in the darkness. The story of the Nag Hammadi library reads like something out of an ancient thriller, a chance discovery that would upend centuries of religious dogma. In December 1945, An Egyptian farmer named Muhammad Ali was digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi when his hoe struck something hard. What he unearthed wasn't just a clay jar, but a time capsule of forbidden knowledge, 13 leather-bound books containing 52 texts, many of them unknown to modern scholars. These weren't ordinary scriptures, they were Gnostic gospels, writings that had been hunted, suppressed, and nearly erased by early church leaders who deemed them dangerous. At the heart of these texts lies a startling vision of Christianity, one where salvation comes not through faith alone but through secret knowledge, or gnosis. The Gospel of Thomas, for instance, presents Jesus not as a savior who dies for humanity's sins, but as a mystical teacher revealing divine truths to his closest followers. The kingdom of God is inside you, it says, a radical departure from the external redemption preached in orthodox texts. Even more provocative is the Gospel of Philip, which describes Jesus sharing a sacred kiss with Mary Magdalene, hinting at a relationship that later Gospels would erase. These aren't just alternate accounts, they're fragments of a Christianity that might have been, had history taken a different turn. What makes the Nag Hammadi texts so explosive is how they expose the messy, contentious birth of early Christianity. The church fathers like Irenaeus and Tertullian spent decades attacking Gnostic ideas, calling them madness and poison. But the Nag Hammadi library proves these weren't fringe beliefs. They were thriving spiritual movements with their own scriptures, rituals, and devoted followers. The Apocryphon of John, for example, offers a creation story where the material world is the work of a flawed demiurge, not the true God, a direct challenge to Genesis. Imagine how different Western thought might be if this dualistic world you had survived instead of being stamped out as heresy. Yet the real shock isn't just what these texts say, but how close they came to vanishing forever. Scholars believe the Nag Hammadi codices were buried in the 4th century, likely by monks trying to protect them during a crackdown on non-orthodox teachings. For 1600 years they lay hidden, their very existence fading into rumor. When they finally resurfaced, it was almost by accident, first sold on the black market, pages burned as fuel before scholars realized their significance. That fragility is haunting. How many other libraries were lost to fire, censorship, or neglect? How much of the past remains buried, waiting to rewrite the stories we tell ourselves? The Gnostic Gospels force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. History is shaped as much by silence as by speech. The Christianity we know today wasn't inevitable, it was one possibility among many, preserved because its defenders had the power to decide what was sacred and what was heresy. The voices in the Nag Hammadi library whisper of roads not taken, of a faith that could have been more mystical, more egalitarian, perhaps even more mysterious. They remind us that every tradition is built on choices, and sometimes the most profound truths are the ones someone tried hardest to destroy. The Voinish manuscript sits in a Yale University library like a locked door with no key, 140 pages of pure mystery written in a script no one can read, illustrated with plants that don't exist, and filled with astrological charts that follow no known system. Since its discovery in 1912, this bizarre book has resisted every attempt at translation, from medieval scholars to modern supercomputers. Its vellum pages whisper secrets in a language that might be code, cipher, or complete fabrication, and the longer it defies understanding, the more tantalizing its silence becomes. Look closely at its pages and the strangeness deepens. The botanical illustrations show roots and leaves with impossible structures. Some resemble known herbs but with twisted proportions, while others seem plucked from a dream. Then there are the nude figures, mostly female, wading through interconnected tubes of green liquid as if part of some alchemical circulatory system. Most perplexing of all are the astrological sections, wheels of stars with unfamiliar constellations, annotated in that same cryptic script. It's as if the book was designed to be just recognizable enough to feel meaningful, yet alien enough to remain forever out of reach. Theories about its origins range from the plausible to the fantastical. Some argue it's a medieval herbal manual, its plants distorted by an artist who'd never seen the originals. Others believe it's the work of Roger Bacon, a 13th century scholar dabbling in proto-scientific encryption. More speculative minds suggest it's an artifact from Atlantis or even an extraterrestrial message. But the most compelling theory, that it preserves a lost esoteric tradition, perhaps a coded alchemical text or the rituals of a secret society. The repeated bathing scenes and celestial diagrams hint at spiritual purification rites, while the invented plants could symbolize stages of transformation. What makes the Voynich manuscript so haunting isn't just its indecipherable text, but what its existence implies. For centuries, those illustrations have stared back at researchers like a reflection in a dim mirror, almost familiar yet warped beyond recognition. It challenges our assumption that history's knowledge was neatly passed down to us. Instead, it suggests gaps, whole systems of thought that might have flourished and vanished without a trace. Every failed attempt to crack its code is a reminder that the past isn't a puzzle we can always solve, and some mysteries refuse to surrender their truths. Perhaps the real power of the Voynich manuscript lies in its stubborn silence. In an age where we expect every question to have an answer, it stands as a monument to the unknown, a reminder that history still holds pockets of darkness. Whether it's an elaborate hoax or the sole surviving text of a forgotten tradition, its unreadable pages force us to confront how much we don't and may never know. And that's why it captivates us, not despite its mystery, but because of it. The Emerald Tablet feels less like an ancient text and more like a key one that unlocks a hidden door between science, spirituality, and the fabric of reality itself. Legend says it was carved from a single block of emerald by Hermes Trismegistus, a figure who straddles myth and history, said to be both the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek messenger of the gods. Its most famous line, "As above, so below," appears simple at first glance, but like sunlight hitting a prism, it fractures into endless meanings. To medieval alchemists, it revealed the secret symmetry between the cosmos and the human soul. To Renaissance scientists, it hinted at invisible forces governing the natural world. Even today, its words vibrate with a peculiar energy, as if they contain truths we're still learning to decode. What makes this tablet so extraordinary isn't just its age, it's how it refuses to fit neatly into any single category. The text describes processes that sound like alchemy, but could just as easily be metaphors for inner transformation. The Father of all perfection in the whole world is here, it proclaims, suggesting that the secrets of creation lie not in distant stars but in the very matter around us. When medieval scholars rediscovered it in Arabic translations during the 12th century, it ignited a firestorm of speculation. Was it a recipe for turning lead into gold? A guide to achieving spiritual enlightenment, or something far more profound, a bridge between the physical and the divine? The tablet's influence stretches further than many realize. Isaac Newton copied its text by hand, convinced it held clues to the laws of motion and gravity. Paracelsus, the father of modern medicine, carried it as a talisman, believing it contained the blueprint for healing both body and mind. Even Carl Jung saw in it a mirror of the human psyche, where the above represented the conscious mind and the below the shadowy depths of the unconscious. Each generation projects its own questions onto the tablet, and somehow it answers them all while revealing nothing outright. But here's the real mystery. Why was this knowledge so fiercely protected? The tablet's survival feels miraculous, copied in secret, passed hand to hand like contraband, often by those who feared its power as much as they revered it. Some say its truths were deemed too dangerous for the unprepared. Others argue it wasn't hidden from the masses but from those who would misuse its wisdom for control. The irony is palpable, a text about universal connection, guarded through centuries of division. Perhaps the Emerald Tablet's greatest lesson is that the most profound truths resist containment. They shimmer at the edges of understanding, inviting us to look deeper not just at the cosmos but at ourselves. In a world that craves certainty, it remains gloriously ambiguous, a reminder that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only pondered. And that, in itself, might be the secret it's been whispering all along. The Book of Enoch reads like a cosmic thriller scribed by a prophet who saw too much. Unlike the carefully curated texts that made it into scripture, Enoch's visions burst with forbidden knowledge, celestial chariots, rogue angels interbreeding with humans, and a detailed tour of heaven and hell that would make Dante's Inferno look tame by comparison. Written between the 3rd and 1st centuries before the Common Era, this apocalyptic text was wildly popular among early Jewish and Christian communities, quoted in the New Testament's letter of Jude, and revered by church fathers like Tertullian. Yet by the 4th century, it vanished from official canons, surviving only in Ethiopian Orthodox tradition and a few scattered fragments. Why would a book so influential suddenly become an outcast? Dive into its pages and the reasons become startlingly clear. Enoch describes the Watchers, a group of 200 angels who rebel against God, teach humanity forbidden arts like metallurgy and astrology, and father hybrid offspring, the Nephilim whose giant bones some believe inspired ancient myths. This wasn't just fantastical storytelling. These narratives challenged fundamental theological boundaries. If angels could fall so easily, what did that say about divine order? If humans could learn secrets from higher beings, where did that leave religious authority? The Watcher's story mirrors Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, but with a darker twist. Knowledge here isn't liberating, it's corrupting. Small wonder early church leaders trying to standardize doctrine saw Enoch's tales as theological dynamite. But Enoch's most explosive revelation isn't about fallen angels, it's about time itself. The book divides history into weeks of millennia, predicting cosmic upheavals, a messianic figure called the Son of Man, and a final judgment where stars fall like rotten fruit. These ideas didn't just influence later apocalyptic writings like Revelation. They suggest a world view where human history is a battleground between cosmic forces. Imagine living in the 4th century, tasked with unifying a fledgling Christian empire. A text painting reality as an ongoing war between light and darkness, where even heaven had traitors, might have seemed less than helpful. Yet the real mystery isn't why Enoch was suppressed, it's how its ideas survived underground. Medieval Kabbalists whispered about the Book of Raziel, said to contain Enoch's lost angelic wisdom. Alchemists pored over his descriptions of celestial mechanics, convinced they hid secrets of transformation. Even today, fragments of Enoch's cosmology echo in everything from UFO lore to conspiracy theories about ancient advanced civilizations. The book's endurance hints at something profound. Some truths refuse to stay buried, even when institutions declare them heresy. Modern scholars now recognize Enoch as a missing link between ancient Near Eastern myths and later Jewish and Christian theology. Its depiction of a heavenly throne surrounded by fiery beings influenced visions in Ezekiel and Isaiah. Its emphasis on a coming judgment shaped early Christian eschatology. But perhaps its greatest legacy is the question it forces us to ask: How much of spiritual history is the result of deliberate choices of certain voices amplified while others were silenced? The Book of Enoch isn't just an ancient text, it's a mirror held up to the very process of how we decide what's sacred and what's forbidden, and who gets to make that call. The Sibylline Books weren't just ancient scrolls, they were Rome's secret weapon, whispered about in the halls of power like a divine cheat code for empire building. According to legend, these prophetic texts arrived in the 6th century before the Common Era, sold to Rome's last king by a mysterious old woman who burned 6 of the 9 books on the spot, demanding the same price for the remaining 3. Whether myth or history, that act of destruction set the tone for their entire legacy, incomplete, enigmatic, and impossibly valuable. Housed beneath the temple of Jupiter, they weren't just read in times of crisis. They were Rome's emergency hotline to the gods. Imagine the scene: barbarians at the gates, plagues ravaging the city, or political factions at each other's throats. The Senate would dispatch its most elite priests, the quindecimviri, to unseal the books and scour their verses for clues. The answers they found weren't straightforward prophecies but riddles wrapped in metaphor, requiring interpretation like divine crossword puzzles. After a crushing defeat at Cannae during the Punic Wars, the books allegedly advised burying 2 Greeks and 2 Gauls alive in the Forum, a grim ritual that, according to historians, somehow turned the tide of war. Were the priests genuinely channeling supernatural insight, or were they master manipulators, using ambiguity to steer policy? The line between prophecy and politics blurred every time those pages were consulted. What makes their loss so haunting is how thoroughly they vanished. When the Temple of Jupiter burned in 83 before the Common Era, the original Sibylline books were reduced to ashes. Later emperors tried to reconstruct them, scouring the Mediterranean for oracles to fill the void, but the replacements lacked the aura of the originals. The few fragments that survive, quoted by ancient authors, hint at apocalyptic warnings. The Roman people will perish by their own wealth, and 3 times shall the empire rise and fall. Were these genuine predictions or clever forgeries added after the fact? Without the full texts, we're left with a tantalizing paradox. The most influential prophecies in Roman history are also the least understood. Perhaps the real power of the Sibylline books lay in their theatricality. In a world where perception was as vital as reality, the mere act of consulting them projected divine favor, uniting fractious leaders under a shared narrative. Their destruction didn't just erase ancient wisdom, it severed our connection to the psychological machinery of an empire that ruled by signs and portents as much as by swords. That's the irony. The books meant to reveal Rome's fate became a metaphor for history itself, fragmentary, elusive, and forever open to interpretation. What if the greatest villain in Christian history was actually following orders? The Gospel of Judas, hidden for nearly 2,000 years, forces us to confront that startling possibility. Discovered in an Egyptian cave in the 1970s but kept from public view for decades, this fragile papyrus text presents Judas Iscariot not as the greedy betrayer of tradition, but as the only disciple who truly understood Jesus' mission. In its pages, Jesus whispers secret knowledge to Judas alone, instructing him to facilitate the crucifixion not out of treachery, but because it was necessary to release Christ's spirit from its earthly prison. Imagine the seismic shift this caused when scholars finally published it in 2006. Centuries of art, literature, and theology depicting Judas as the epitome of evil suddenly faced an alternative where he was the hero. This gospel's power lies in how it inverts familiar symbols. Where the New Testament shows Judas hanging himself in remorse, the Gospel of Judas describes him ascending to a heavenly realm after the crucifixion, welcomed by divine light. Instead of 30 pieces of silver as payment for betrayal, the text suggests Judas acted without material motive, an obedient servant carrying out the hardest task. Early church leaders like Irenaeus condemned this version as fictitious history, but modern scholars recognize it as part of a vibrant Gnostic tradition that saw Judas's role not as sinful but as sacred. The implications are staggering. If Jesus asked Judas to hand him over to authorities, then the foundational Christian story of betrayal and redemption rests on a fundamental misunderstanding. Why was this text so dangerous to the early church? Because it challenges the very nature of sacrifice. Traditional Christianity hinges on the idea that Jesus died for humanity's sins, an act made possible by Judas's moral failure. But if Judas was cooperating with divine will, then the crucifixion becomes less about atonement and more about liberation, a Gnostic concept where the material world is a cage to escape rather than a creation to redeem. This wasn't just theological nitpicking, it struck at the heart of how early Christians understood salvation. Small wonder church authorities labeled it heresy and sought to erase it from history. The rediscovery of the Gospel of Judas does more than add another ancient text to the shelf. It exposes how history gets written by the victors. For centuries, Judas served as Christianity's ultimate cautionary tale, the friend who sells you out, the disciple who falls to greed. But this gospel suggests another narrative might have flourished had certain voices not been silenced. Its survival in that Egyptian cave, buried by someone who refused to let it burn, feels like an act of defiance across millennia. Now that we have it, the question isn't just whether Judas was misunderstood, it's how many other silenced perspectives might still be waiting in the shadows, ready to reshape the stories we thought we knew. The Secret Gospel of Mark reads like something ripped from a theological spy novel, a cryptic fragment hinting at teachings too explosive for public consumption. In 1958, scholar Morton Smith made a staggering claim. While cataloging manuscripts at the Mar Saba monastery near Jerusalem, he discovered a handwritten letter by the 2nd century Bishop Clement of Alexandria, referencing a longer, secret version of Mark's Gospel. According to Clement, this version contained passages where Jesus initiates a young man into the mystery of the kingdom of God at night, wearing only a linen cloth, an image sparking endless speculation about hidden rituals or esoteric knowledge. The implications were earth-shaking. If authentic, this text suggested early Christians knew a Jesus far different from the one later canonized, and that the New Testament we have might be a carefully pruned version of a wilder, more mysterious tradition. Debate erupted immediately. Was this a genuine lost scripture or an elaborate forgery? Smith's supporters pointed to Clement's letter style, which matched known works, and the sheer improbability that a modern scholar could perfectly mimic ancient Greek handwriting. Critics, however, noted oddities like the fact no one else had seen the original manuscript before it mysteriously disappeared from Mar Saba's library. The fragment we have exists only in Smith's photographs, leaving scholars to argue over shadows. Yet even if forged, the text's power lies in the questions it forces us to ask. Why would someone, whether an ancient bishop or a modern prankster, invent a scene of Jesus conducting secret nocturnal initiations? What does that reveal about our hunger for hidden knowledge? The so-called mystery described in the Secret Gospel tantalizes because it echoes other suppressed traditions. Like the Gnostic Gospels, it hints at Jesus imparting wisdom to an inner circle, contrasting with the public sermons of canonical texts. The linen-clad initiation recalls Egyptian baptismal rites or even Greco-Roman mystery cults, suggesting early Christianity might have absorbed or competed with these practices. Most provocative is Clement's admission that while the secret mark was authentic, it had been corrupted by heretics and should only be read allegorically. That's the real bombshell, not just that secret teachings existed, but that church authorities knew and selectively reinterpreted them. Imagine what else might have been edited out. The secret Gospels Jesus is more mystical mentor than sacrificial lamb, more concerned with transcendent experience than doctrinal purity. Had this version survived, Christianity might have developed as a mystery religion, with layered teachings for different levels of initiates. Instead, we're left with fragments and rumors, a puzzle where the missing pieces might rewrite everything. The controversy over its authenticity almost doesn't matter. What lingers is the possibility that somewhere, under layers of parchment and time, there's a Jesus we're still not allowed to meet. The Archimedes Palimpsest is a haunting reminder of how easily genius can be scraped away literally. In the 10th century, a scribe took one of the most advanced mathematical texts of antiquity, scrubbed its pages clean with pumice stone, and overwrote it with prayers. What might have seemed like practical recycling at the time became one of history's great ironies, a medieval prayer book preserving and simultaneously erasing the work of Archimedes, the man who arguably came closer than anyone to inventing calculus 2 millennia before Newton. When this layered manuscript resurfaced in the early 20th century, no one realized its true significance until modern imaging technology revealed the ghostly traces of Greek letters beneath the hymns. The words that emerged weren't just lost, they were revolutionary. Among the recovered texts was the method of mechanical theorems, where Archimedes describes using infinitesimals to calculate areas and volumes, a concept so advanced it wouldn't be formalized until the 17th century. Even more astonishing was Stomachion, a puzzle exploring combinatorics, a branch of mathematics that wouldn't fully develop for another 2,000 years. These weren't just idle thought experiments. Archimedes was essentially playing with the building blocks of modern physics and computer science, while Rome still ruled the Mediterranean. The implications are staggering. How many other intellectual leaps were achieved and then lost in the shuffle of history? What makes the palimpsest so poignant is the sheer randomness of its survival. The only reason we have these texts at all is because Archimedes' originals were copied onto parchment in the 10th century, likely from even older scrolls, and then, through pure chance, that parchment was deemed reusable rather than burned. The prayer book's survival through wars, plagues, and neglect feels like a cosmic joke, as if history itself couldn't decide whether to preserve or obliterate this knowledge. Modern scholars needed multispectral imaging, X-rays, and particle accelerators to tease out the original ink, a technological rescue mission for ideas that were nearly erased forever. This raises an uncomfortable question. How much of antiquity's brilliance never made it even this far? We know the Library of Alexandria held countless works that vanished in flames. But the palimpsest hints at a quieter, more insidious loss, the slow erosion of knowledge through neglect, repurposing, or simple ignorance of its value. Every time a scribe reused parchment or a library crumbled, entire worlds of thought might have disappeared without protest. The tragedy isn't just what we've lost, but that we'll never know how much we're missing. Yet there's hope in the palimpsest's layered pages. Like a mathematical metaphor, it suggests that even when history tries to overwrite the past, traces remain waiting for the right tools, the right minds to bring them back to light. Archimedes' ghostly equations challenge our smug assumptions about progress, whispering that the ancients might have glimpsed truths we're still rediscovering. In that sense, the palimpsest isn't just a relic. It's a mirror, forcing us to wonder what future generations might one day recover from the fragments we've left behind. The Dresden Codex glows with celestial wisdom, its weathered pages preserving calculations so precise they still leave modern astronomers in awe. Of the thousands of Mayan books that once filled temple libraries, This battered survivor, dating back to the 11th or 12th century, stands as one of only 4 known pre-Columbian manuscripts to escape the fires of Spanish conquest. What makes it extraordinary isn't just its rarity, but the sheer sophistication of its contents. Detailed charts predicting planetary movements, eclipse cycles, and even the complex dance of Venus across the sky with accuracy that rivals modern astronomy. Take the Venus tables, for example. The Maya tracked the planet's 584-day cycle with such precision that their calculations were off by just 2 hours over 5 centuries. These weren't vague celestial musings, they were mathematical masterpieces, combining observational data with intricate long-count calendar mechanics. The Codex even includes correction tables showing how Mayan astronomers refined their predictions over generations. But here's what's truly staggering. These tables weren't just scientific tools. They were sacred scripts linking cosmic events to rituals, agriculture, and warfare. A Venus rise might signal the ideal time to plant corn or launch a battle, proving that for the Maya, science and spirituality were inseparable. Yet the Dresden Codex is merely a glimpse through a keyhole. Spanish Bishop Diego de Landa's infamous Auto da Fe in 1562 consumed countless other texts, encyclopedias of medicine, botany, and architecture that might have revealed the full scope of Mayan innovation. We know they developed the concept of 0 centuries before Europe, engineered sprawling cities with acoustically perfect ball courts, and charted lunar cycles with jaw-dropping accuracy. But what else vanished in those flames? Perhaps manuals on their hydraulic systems that turned swamps into fertile gardens, or treatises on the medicinal plants they used with unrivaled expertise. The real tragedy lies in the gaps between the Codex's surviving pages. Its bark paper folds hint at lost volumes that might have contained star catalogues rivaling Ptolemy's, or maps of the cosmos depicting constellations we no longer recognize. Modern researchers using spectral imaging occasionally uncover faint traces of erased or overwritten calculations, palimpsests within a palimpsest, suggesting these books were living documents, constantly updated as knowledge grew. Each discovery peels back another layer, reminding us that the Maya didn't just observe the heavens, they conversed with them, recording a dialogue we're only beginning to decipher. What survives in the Dresden Codex isn't just a relic of ancient science. It's a testament to the fragility of human knowledge and a warning about how much can be lost when dogma triumphs over curiosity. Those fragile pages, stained with time and nearly reduced to ash, hold a silent challenge. How many other civilizations reached similar heights, only to have their wisdom erased? The stars they charted still shine, but the minds that understood them so intimately are gone, leaving us to piece together their legacy one equation at a time. The Popol Vuh isn't just a book, it's a resurrection. When Spanish missionaries burned Mayan codices during the conquest, they believed they were erasing pagan beliefs. But in the highlands of Guatemala, Kayich elders secretly preserved their sacred stories orally, until an anonymous scribe transcribed them in the mid-16th century using the Latin alphabet. This act of defiance saved one of the most profound creation narratives in human history, a text that doesn't just tell how the world began, but why we're here at all. Open its pages and you're plunged into a cosmos where gods experiment with life like artists at a workbench. First, they craft beings from mud, but they crumble. Next, they carve humans from wood, lifeless puppets without souls. Finally, corn becomes the sacred material, mixed with divine blood to create true people. This isn't just myth, it's a spiritual blueprint revealing how the Maya saw humanity as literally made from sustenance and sacrifice. The parallels to other traditions are eerie clay figures in Genesis, Prometheus molding humans from Earth, yet the Popol Vuh's vision is uniquely grounded in the very crop that sustained Mesoamerican civilization. Then there are the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque, whose adventures read like an ancient Mesoamerican epic. They outwit death gods in the underworld, play ball games with celestial stakes, and ultimately transform into the sun and moon. Their story isn't mere entertainment but a guide to navigating life's chaos, teaching that cleverness and courage can overcome even the darkest forces. What's haunting is how close we came to losing these tales. The surviving manuscript was hidden so well that it wasn't rediscovered until the early 18th century in a Chichicastenango convent, where some friar, perhaps moved by its beauty, sheltered it instead of burning it. Yet the Popol Vuh's survival is also a reminder of all we've lost. Spanish chroniclers mention other sacred books, the Chilam Balam texts, the annals of the Caciquels, but most exist only as fragments or colonial-era reinterpretations. How many other cosmologies, philosophies, or histories vanished when those bonfires consumed thousands of bark paper codices? The Popol Vuh offers a tantalizing hint. Its opening laments that the original hieroglyphic version is now hidden from the searchers and the thinkers. That phrase echoes like a ghost, making us wonder what other indigenous masterpieces might have once existed, filled with wisdom we'll never know. What makes the Popol Vuh so vital isn't just its stories but its perspective. Unlike the linear, monotheistic narratives imposed by colonizers, it presents a cyclical world where gods aren't omnipotent but experimental, where humans aren't dominators of nature but part of its fabric. It's a worldview that resonates powerfully today as we grapple with environmental crises and the limits of human arrogance. This sacred text barely survived, but in doing so, it hands us something precious, a chance to hear voices from a civilization that refused to be silenced. The Kolbrin Bible sits on the fringes of history like a puzzle no one can quite solve, part ancient wisdom, part enigmatic artifact, and entirely controversial. Unlike traditional scriptures preserved by religious institutions, this eclectic collection claims lineage from both Celtic druids and Egyptian priests, compiled over centuries before somehow surviving the medieval era in secret. Its pages weave together cosmology, morality tales, and startlingly precise astronomical observations. But what truly grabs attention are its alternate versions of familiar biblical stories. Take the Great Flood, where Genesis describes 40 days of rain. The Colbren portrays a celestial catastrophe, a wandering destroyer passing near Earth, triggering tidal waves and volcanic fires. This isn't just a different perspective, it's a wholesale reimagining of disaster as cosmic rather than divine punishment. Skeptics dismiss the Colbren as a 20th century fabrication, pointing to its murky provenance. The text first surfaced in the 1950s, published by a small British group called the Chaldeans, who claimed it was copied from ancient bronze plates salvaged from a monastery fire. No archaeological evidence supports this, and linguistic analysis raises red flags. Some passages sound suspiciously modern. Yet intriguingly, certain sections align with obscure Egyptian astronomical records, like descriptions of a dark star companion to our sun, a concept mainstream science only began exploring decades later. Whether ancient or modern, the Colbren's uncanny details force a thorny question. Why would forgers include such specific, verifiable elements instead of sticking to vague mysticism? What makes the Colbren tantalizing isn't just its content but the worldview it represents. Its flood narrative, for instance, lacks Noah's moral arc. Instead, it reads like a clinical report of survival, emphasizing practical knowledge over covenant theology. Similarly, its creation story describes evolutionary leaps guided by celestial forces, blending science and spirituality in ways that feel startlingly contemporary. These aren't the hallmarks of typical pseudepigrapha. They suggest a tradition that valued observation alongside revelation. Modern researchers note parallels between the Kolbrin's destroyer and today's theories about near-Earth comets or solar micronovas, echoes of a forgotten cataclysm preserved as myth. Mainstream academia's reluctance to engage with the Colbren reveals a deeper tension in how we vet ancient texts. Without clear provenance or carbon-datable materials, scholars face a dilemma: risk legitimizing a hoax or ignore something that might hold fragments of genuine tradition. Yet the Kolbren's marginalization also reflects our bias toward official scriptures. History is written by the preservers, not necessarily the accurate. For every Dead Sea Scroll or Nag Hammadi library, how many texts were lost because they challenged dominant narratives? The Kolbren, whether authentic or ingeniously crafted, forces us to confront how much of the past remains hidden, not in caves or libraries, but in plain sight, dismissed because it doesn't fit the story we've decided to tell. The Oura Linda book bursts onto the scene like a thunderclap from the past, a leather-bound manuscript claiming to chronicle 4,000 years of Frisian history, written in a language that shouldn't exist. Discovered in the 19th century, its yellowed pages tell of a seafaring matriarchy ruled by priestesses called folk mothers, navigating the Atlantic with lunar calendars and advanced shipbuilding techniques centuries before the Vikings. According to the text, these women governed a confederation of islands and coastal tribes, preserving wisdom passed down since the mythical sinking of Atlant, their version of Atlantis. It's a story so sweeping, so radical, that it either rewrites European prehistory or stands as one of history's most elaborate literary hoaxes. What makes the Oura Linda book so polarizing isn't just its content, but its eerie plausibility. The text describes flood events matching known geological upheavals around 1200 before the Common Era, when rising seas reshaped the North Sea coast. It references trade routes later verified by archaeology, like the amber roads connecting the Baltic to the Mediterranean. Even its matriarchal structure finds echoes in Tacitus's accounts of Germanic Cyrus's wielding political power. Yet the manuscript's critics pounce on its anachronisms, like references to paper in eras when only parchment existed, or its suspiciously modern-sounding democratic ideals. The debate rages: is this a genuine survivor from antiquity, or a clever 19th-century nationalist forgery meant to glorify Dutch heritage? Theories about its origins spiral in wild directions. Some linguists note its Old Frisian dialect contains grammatical quirks unknown to modern reconstructions, suggesting either an authentic archaic voice or a forger with extraordinary linguistic intuition. Others point to the book's obsession with celestial navigation, including detailed star charts that align with Bronze Age records. Then there's the eerie prediction of a great fire from the sky, interpreted by some as a folk memory of a comet impact or volcanic event. These details don't neatly fit either the hoax or a genuine camps, leaving scholars chasing shadows. Perhaps the most tantalizing question isn't whether the Oura Linda book is real, but why its vision of the past unsettles us so deeply. A society where women held spiritual and political authority, where technology served communal needs rather than conquest, where maritime trade connected cultures without colonialism. It's a mirror held up to everything conventional history claims about primitive Europe. Even if fabricated, the text forces us to confront how much of history is shaped by the biases of those who recorded it. After all, the victors didn't just write the history books, they decided which stories were worth preserving at all. What lingers isn't just skepticism or belief, but the haunting possibility that some truths survive as fiction because reality wasn't ready for them. Whether the Aura Linda book is a fraud or a revelation, its greatest gift might be the questions it leaves swirling in its wake. How many other chronicles were lost to time, fire, or disbelief? And what might we learn if we dared to take them seriously? The Book of Thoth whispers through the corridors of ancient Egyptian history like a shadow, elusive, tantalizing, and drenched in the promise of forbidden knowledge. Unlike physical manuscripts we've recovered, this one exists primarily in legend, described in temple inscriptions and Greek papyri as a divine treatise penned by Thoth himself, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, magic, and the moon. To hold it, they said, was to wield power over the cosmos, to understand the speech of animals, to command the elements, even to cheat death. But here's the haunting question: was it ever more than a myth, or did someone, somewhere, once clutch its secrets in their hands? Dive into the lore, and the Book of Thoth begins to feel unsettlingly real. The Westcar Papyrus, dating back to Egypt's Middle Kingdom, tells of a prince who uncovers the book beneath the waters of the Nile, only to face divine retribution for daring to read its spells. Another tale, preserved in Greek texts, describes a desperate seeker who finds the book hidden in a series of nested golden caskets, each inscribed with warnings. These stories share eerie similarities. The book is always guarded, always lethal to the unworthy. It's as if the ancients were trying to tell us something, not just about the text's power, but about the peril of unearthing truths meant for the gods alone. Modern scholars grapple with a tantalizing possibility. Could the Book of Thoth be a distorted memory of actual sacred texts? The Egyptian Book of the Dead contains spells to navigate the afterlife, while the Hermetica, attributed to Thoth's Greek counterpart Hermes Trismegistus, blends philosophy and mysticism. But the legendary Book of Thoth was said to dwarf these, a master key to all knowledge, from astronomy to necromancy. Some speculate it might have been a repository of temple secrets, perhaps even early scientific concepts disguised as magic. Imagine a manual detailing the physics behind pyramid construction or the medicinal properties of plants, wrapped in allegory to protect it from the uninitiated. The most chilling clue comes from an unexpected source, the Roman historian Suetonius. He recounts how Emperor Nero's agents ransacked Egypt for arcane texts, seeking the supreme knowledge of Thoth. Centuries later, Arab scholars like al-Makrizi wrote of hidden chambers beneath the Great Pyramid, where the first wisdom was stored. These scattered references hint that something extraordinary once existed, even if its true nature was lost or deliberately obscured. What lingers isn't just curiosity about a vanished book, but the unsettling idea that some knowledge might have been too dangerous to preserve. If the Book of Thoth held insights into human consciousness, cosmic laws, or technologies we've yet to rediscover, its destruction or concealment wouldn't just be a loss. It would be a warning. The ancients believed certain truths could unravel reality itself. As we sift through the fragments they left behind, we're left to wonder, were they protecting the world from the book, or the book from the world? The Tarim Basin mummies stare out from the past with haunting blue eyes and woven textiles straight out of Bronze Age Europe, yet they were buried thousands of miles east in the sands of what's now Western China. When archaeologists first uncovered these remarkably preserved bodies in the 1990s, the discovery sent shockwaves through historical circles. Here were individuals with distinctly Caucasian features, dating back as early as 1800 before the Common Era, wearing plaid patterns resembling Celtic cloth and felt hats that wouldn't look out of place on the steppes of Ukraine. But the real bombshell wasn't just their presence, it was the manuscripts found nearby, scrawled in scripts that defied translation, hinting at languages lost to time and a cultural crossroads far more complex than we'd imagined. Among the most baffling finds was the Tocharian language, deciphered from Buddhist manuscripts in the early 20th century, spoken by a people who called themselves the Arsi. Tocharian turned out to be a distant cousin of Celtic and Latin, a branch of the Indo-European language family that somehow took root in the heart of Asia. How did these words closer to English than to Mandarin end up on the Silk Road? The implications are staggering. This wasn't just a trade route for silks and spices. It was a highway for ideas where Greek-inspired Buddhist art met Chinese papermaking and nomadic herders carried stories across continents. The Tocharian texts, with their references to camel caravans and monastery libraries, suggest a melting pot where languages and beliefs hybridized in ways that challenge our neat divisions between East and West. Yet Tocharian might be just the beginning. Fragments of other unknown scripts litter the Tarim Basin, symbols etched into wood, ink on crumbling paper, even graffiti on cave walls. Some resemble early Persian cuneiform. Others share strokes with Tibetan or Sanskrit but refuse to conform to any known alphabet. The most tantalizing are the Cotonese documents, which blend Indian, Iranian, and mysterious local dialects into a linguistic cocktail that scholars are still untangling. These texts aren't just shopping lists or royal decrees. One fragile scroll describes a Zoroastrian fire ritual performed under a new moon, while another tells of a princess who mediated between warring tribes using the tongue of the old gods. What stories might these pages hold if we could fully decipher them? The silence of these lost languages speaks volumes about how history gets written. The Tarim Basin was once a cultural whirlpool where Sogdian merchants, Tibetan warriors, and Igha scribes traded goods and glyphs. But as empires rose and fell, their voices faded, sometimes by accident, often by design. Chinese annals from the Tang dynasty dismiss the region's peoples as barbarians with no writing worth recording, while later Islamic chroniclers focused on conquest rather than preservation. The manuscripts that survived did so by chance, tucked into sealed jars or buried beneath desert storms. Now, new technology offers hope. Spectral imaging has revealed faded ink on scraps once deemed blank, while AI compares unknown symbols to databases of every known script. Every recovered word is a thread in a vast tapestry, one that might rewrite not just linguistic history, but our understanding of how ideas flowed between continents. When a Tocharian love poem surfaced recently, its lines, "Your words are honey, your voice a drum calling me home," it wasn't just poetry. It was proof that the human heart beat the same along the Silk Road as anywhere else. The Mummies' physical presence shocked us, but their words might yet shake the foundations of history itself. The Cathar texts whisper to us from the ashes of history, fragments of a faith so threatening to medieval power that an entire crusade was launched to erase it. Known as the good Christians to their followers and heretics to their enemies, the Cathars of southern France practiced a form of Christianity so radically different from Rome's that it sparked one of the bloodiest religious purges in Europe. Their sacred writings, meticulously copied and guarded, were hunted down and burned with such fervor that today, only echoes remain in inquisitorial records and a handful of surviving passages. But those fragments reveal a worldview that would have shaken Christendom to its core. At the heart of Cathar belief was a stark dualism. The material world was the creation of a lesser, flawed God, often identified with the Old Testament's wrathful Yahweh, while the true, benevolent God ruled a realm of pure spirit. This wasn't just theological nitpicking. It meant the Church, with its ornate cathedrals and political power, was part of the corrupt material order. The Cathars rejected the sacraments, the cross, which they saw as a tool of torture, not salvation, even the idea of Christ's physical resurrection. To them, salvation came through consolamentum, a single ritual of spiritual baptism that freed the soul from the cycle of reincarnation. Imagine the threat this posed to medieval Catholicism, where the Church held the keys to heaven through confession, communion, and penance. The few texts that survived the fires hint at even more explosive ideas. A passage from the lost book of the Two Principles describes the soul as a divine spark trapped in the prison of flesh, echoing ancient Gnostic teachings. Another fragment, quoted by their persecutors, claims that even the devil was once an angel who fell not through rebellion, but through sorrow at the suffering of the world, a startlingly compassionate twist on traditional demonology. Most provocative of all were whispers of a secret Gospel of John, altered to align with Cathar teachings, where Jesus appears as a spirit who only seemed to eat and drink to comfort his disciples. Had this text survived intact, it might have rewritten Christian theology as radically as the Nag Hammadi Gospels did. Why did the Church react with such brutal efficiency? The Albigensian Crusade wasn't just about doctrine, it was about control. Catharism thrived among women and artisans, offering a direct path to spiritual authority outside the Church's rigid hierarchy. Their perfecti, or spiritual leaders, lived in austere poverty, a stark contrast to the wealth of bishops. When the Crusaders sacked Béziers in 1209, slaughtering thousands with the cry, "Kill them all, God will know his own," it wasn't just heresy they sought to extinguish. It was the dangerous idea that faith could exist without intermediaries, that the divine might be closer to a weaver in Toulouse than to the Pope in Rome. The tragedy of the Cathar texts lies in what we'll never know. Inquisitorial registers mention confiscated books with strange diagrams of the heavens and prayers to the God beyond gods, tantalizing hints of a rich cosmology now lost. Some scholars believe their teachings preserved strands of ancient Bogomil wisdom from the Balkans, or even earlier Manichaean traditions stretching back to Persia. Others speculate that troubadour poetry, with its themes of courtly love and spiritual longing, carried coded Cathar ideas into the mainstream. But these are ghosts compared to the living tradition that once flourished in Languedoc's sunlit hills. What survives is a lesson in the fragility of dissent. The Cathars left no pyramids, no grand manuscripts, just scorch marks on history and a question: how many other visions of the sacred have been erased because they dared to imagine the divine differently? Their texts burned, but the embers of their defiance still glow, reminding us that sometimes the most dangerous ideas aren't those written in ink, but the ones that refuse to die in the hearts of those who heard them. The Akashic records shimmer at the edges of human understanding, not as parchment or stone, but as an ethereal library said to hold every thought, action, and event across time. Theosophists in the 19th century gave it a name, but the idea itself is ancient, echoing through Hindu Vedas as the Akasha, a primordial ether that preserves the imprints of existence. Imagine a dimension where the whispers of lost civilizations, the unrecorded lives of ordinary people, and even the forgotten innovations of history's greatest minds linger like radio waves, waiting for the right receiver. This isn't just mystical speculation, it's a tantalizing lens through which to view the inexplicable genius of antiquity. How else, some ask, could cultures separated by oceans and millennia have built pyramids with nearly identical mathematical precision or shared eerily similar flood myths? Consider the Voynich manuscript again, that unreadable cipher filled with botanical and celestial wonders. Could its creator have tapped into some universal reservoir of knowledge, transcribing insights that defied the scientific understanding of their time? The same question lingers over the Emerald Tablet's alchemical wisdom or the Dresden Codex's astronomical accuracy. These texts don't just challenge our timeline of human achievement, they hint at a provocative possibility. that certain individuals, whether through meditation, ritual, or sheer intuition, might have accessed what ancient Indian sages called the memory of nature. Even Nikola Tesla, that towering genius of the modern age, spoke of receiving visions in flashes, as if downloading blueprints from some invisible archive. But here's where the mystery deepens. If the Akashic records exist as a metaphysical repository, could physical manuscripts be their shadow, fragments of that greater truth imperfectly captured? The Nag Hammadi Gospels, for instance, speak of hidden knowledge reserved for the spiritually ready, while the Kolbrin Bible's apocalyptic prophecies read like warnings transcribed from a cosmic broadcast. These texts share an uncanny quality. They feel less invented than received, as if their authors were scribes for something far older. Even the architectural precision of megalithic sites like Göbekli Tepe, built 12,000 years ago by a culture with no known writing system, suggests a transfer of knowledge that bypasses conventional means. The skeptics, of course, dismiss such notions as wishful thinking. They point to the human brain's remarkable capacity for pattern recognition, our tendency to weave coincidence into conspiracy. Yet the persistence of the Akashic myth across cultures, from the Jewish Kabbalah's Book of Remembrance to Edgar Case's trance-state readings, raises a compelling counterpoint. Why would civilizations with no contact independently envision the same concept of a cosmic database? Whether metaphor or reality, the idea speaks to something primal in us, the longing to recover what's been erased, to hear the voices history silenced. Perhaps the most haunting implication lies in the gaps. If the Akashic records hold everything, then every burned library, every suppressed text, every oral tradition lost to time isn't truly gone, just misplaced. The Cathar text's dualist teachings, the Mayan medical manuals consumed by Spanish flames, the songs of prehistoric shamans, they might still exist, vibrating in some imperceptible frequency. This isn't just about nostalgia for the past. It's about the fragments we're still missing, the pieces that could reshape our understanding of consciousness itself. The Akashic records, real or imagined, remind us that history isn't a closed book but an open field, where the wind still carries echoes of all we've forgotten and all we've yet to remember. The Tarim King list sits in its museum case like a puzzle, missing half its pieces of fragile papyrus that somehow survived 3,000 years only to crumble in the hands of modern archaeologists. When Jean-François Champollion, the man who deciphered the Rosetta Stone, first examined it in 1824, he recognized its staggering value, a register of Egyptian pharaohs stretching back to mythical times, written in hieratic script during the reign of Ramesses Roman II. But here's what makes it extraordinary. It doesn't just name kings we know. It chronicles dynasties lost to history, gods who ruled as mortals, and timelines that don't match anything carved on temple walls. This isn't just a list, it's a ghostly echo of histories that didn't make it into the official record. Take the enigmatic Aku, or spirit rulers, mentioned before the first human pharaohs. The Tarim list assigns them reigns lasting hundreds of years, impossible by mortal standards, yet eerily similar to Sumerian king lists that also speak of pre-flood rulers with fantastical lifespans. Were these metaphors for forgotten ages, fragments of a time before written history, or could they hint at a deliberate effort to stitch myth and reality into a seamless narrative? The list's damage makes it impossible to know for sure. Whole sections are reduced to flakes of papyrus, their secrets lost to careless handling during its journey from a Theban tomb to an Italian museum. Imagine what those missing lines might have revealed: entire dynasties now known only by their shadowy length. X ruled for Y years, with no name left to trace. Then there are the discrepancies. The Tarim list places some pharaohs in a different order than the famed Abydos carving, and it includes rulers like the mysterious Neferkare the Younger, absent from all other records. Some scholars think these weren't errors but alternative traditions, proof that even ancient Egyptians disagreed about their own past. The most tantalizing gap comes near the end, where the papyrus mentions a chaotic period called the Time of the Asiatics, likely referring to the Hyksos invasion. But the details are illegible, leaving us to wonder, did the scribes record a version of events too controversial for temple walls, a frank admission of foreign rule that later pharaohs would rather forget? Modern technology offers glimmers of hope. Multispectral imaging has teased out faded ink in the torn fragments, revealing partial names like Sekhem and Kars pharaohs who may have ruled during Egypt's murky intermediate periods. One reconstructed section even lists ephemeral kings from the Second Intermediate Period, confirming the existence of short-lived dynasties once dismissed as myth. But the real treasure would be recovering the list's final columns, which allegedly totaled every ruler from the gods to Ramesses Roman II. If found, they might settle debates about the length of certain reigns or reveal missing links between dynasties. What haunts historians isn't just the list's physical fragility, but what its omissions imply. Official temple chronicles were propaganda, chiseled in stone to glorify the current regime. But this papyrus tucked away in a tomb feels different, a scribe's private attempt to preserve every name, even the inconvenient ones. Its very existence suggests that for all their monument building, the Egyptians knew how easily history could be rewritten. The Tarim King list is more than a relic. It's a warning that the past we think is set in stone might just be the version that outlasted the rest. The copper scroll stands apart from its Dead Sea companions like a riddle wrapped in oxidized metal. Unlike the leather and papyrus scrolls filled with religious texts, this beaten sheet of copper, discovered in 1952, reads like an ancient treasure hunter's checklist: 64 locations where staggering quantities of gold, silver, and sacred objects were supposedly buried. 12.5 tons of silver here, 65 gold bars there, even cryptic references to priestly garments and fragrant resins. The numbers alone are mind-bending. Over 1.5 million ounces of precious metals listed, a fortune that would dwarf the wealth of entire kingdoms at the time. But here's the twist that keeps scholars arguing. Was this a literal inventory of the Second Temple's hidden wealth, or something far more enigmatic? Those who take the scroll at face value point to its startling specificity. Location 21, for instance, directs seekers to the cavity of the old house of tribute in the platform of the chain, while 38 mentions a drain pipe in Solomon's Canal. These aren't vague, poetic metaphors, they're practical directions, as if meant for someone who knew the landscape intimately. Some archaeologists speculate the scroll records emergency caches hidden during the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, when rebels scrambled to protect the temple's sacred treasures from looting. If true, recovering even a fraction could rewrite our understanding of Judea's economic and spiritual life. Imagine uncovering the breastplates of high priests or the original menorah artifacts that now exist only in descriptions. Yet skeptics raise compelling doubts. Why would a list of unimaginable riches be etched onto durable copper, then left in a cave for anyone to find? Wouldn't such sensitive information be memorized by a select few or destroyed after recovery? The scroll's cryptic phrasing mentioning the ruins of the Valley of Achor or the mound of the washer's house might not be geographic markers at all, but coded language for spiritual concepts. Some scholars note parallels to the treasure of light described in other Dead Sea texts, suggesting the metals symbolize divine wisdom rather than physical loot. Even the scroll's unique material hints at symbolism. Copper, associated in the ancient Near East with durability and the underworld, could signify truths meant to endure beyond earthly destruction. The most tantalizing theory bridges both views. Perhaps the treasures were real, but their hiding places were deliberately obscured to protect them from Roman hands. The scroll's mix of precise and ambiguous instructions, like saying to dig 40 cubits toward the north, but not specifying from which landmark, could be a form of security through confusion. After all, the Qumran community that likely safeguarded the scrolls were masters of allegory, weaving layers of meaning into their texts. What if the copper scroll was designed to be read two ways, as a practical guide for initiates and a poetic cipher for outsiders? Modern searches have only deepened the mystery. Expeditions to proposed sites like the caves around Jericho or the ruins of Qumran have turned up empty. Yet tantalizing clues persist: a 1st century coin hoard found near one location, or a collapsed tunnel system matching another description. With each failed dig, the question grows louder: are we misreading the map, or is the treasure still waiting, safeguarded by time and clever deception? The copper scroll refuses to surrender its secrets easily. Whether inventory or allegory, it stands as a testament to humanity's oldest obsession, the irresistible allure of hidden knowledge, and the lengths we'll go to protect it. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene shatters stained glass stereotypes with a single, electrifying declaration: the Savior loved her more than us. Unearthed in 1896 but written centuries earlier, this fragile papyrus text doesn't just include Mary among Jesus' followers, it positions her as his most trusted confidante, the one disciple who truly grasped his teachings while the others stumbled in confusion. Picture the scene. After the resurrection, the male apostles are paralyzed with fear until Mary steps forward, recounting private visions where Jesus revealed the soul's ascent past hostile cosmic forces. Her words ignite controversy. Andrew dismisses her, Peter sneers. Did he really speak with a woman without our knowledge? But Levi defends her. If the Savior made her worthy, who are you to reject her? This isn't just an alternate gospel. It's a window into a Christianity where spiritual authority wasn't determined by gender, but by wisdom. What makes this text revolutionary isn't just its content, but its very existence. While the New Testament reduces Mary Magdalene to a supporting role, either as demon-possessed sinner or passive witness at the tomb, this gospel paints her as a theological trailblazer. Her dialogues with Jesus explore concepts straight from Platonic philosophy: the illusory nature of material existence, the divine spark within each person, and the importance of inner knowledge over blind faith. Had such ideas flourished, Christianity might have developed as a mystical tradition, valuing direct spiritual experience over hierarchical priesthoods. The implications ripple outward. No medieval witch hunts targeting dangerous female mystics, no Reformation-era debates about women's souls, perhaps even an earlier embrace of female clergy. Yet the Gospel's near erasure speaks volumes. Early church fathers like Tertullian railed against heretical groups who allowed women to teach, while the Gospel of Mary circulated secretly among Gnostic circles before vanishing for 1500 years. The irony is thick. The same institution that later venerated Mary as a penitent prostitute, a conflation with an unnamed sinner in Luke, actively suppressed writings showing her as an intellectual powerhouse. Modern scholars note how this mirrors broader patterns. Texts highlighting female leadership, like the Acts of Thecla or the Gospel of Eve, were systematically excluded from the canon. The Gospel of Mary didn't disappear because it was fringe. It was buried because it was dangerous. Imagine walking into a medieval cathedral where frescoes showed Mary Magdalene preaching to the apostles instead of washing Jesus' feet. Envision a Christianity where apostle wasn't synonymous with 12 men, where the voice of the woman who financed Jesus' ministry, as Luke 8 mentions, carried equal weight to fishermen and tax collectors. The Gospel of Mary forces us to confront how much of religious history is shaped not by divine mandate but by human choices about whose stories get told, whose authority gets recognized, and who holds the pen that writes tradition. Its survival, tucked away in some Egyptian monk's library, feels like a defiant act across millennia, a whisper that even the most carefully curated narratives can't silence every alternative. Nowhere is this tension more palpable than in the text's final, heartbreaking gap. The last 4 pages are missing, torn away. What secrets did they hold? A fuller account of Mary's visions, a rebuttal to Peter's jealousy, we'll never know. But that absence itself is a metaphor for all the voices history has excised, the wisdom reduced to fragments. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene doesn't just challenge Christian history, it asks who else might be missing from the story and what truths we've lost in their silence. Buried beneath the sands of time, the demotic spells of Greco-Roman Egypt whisper secrets of a world where magic wasn't just fantasy, it was as ordinary as a morning prayer. These recently deciphered papyri, scrawled in the cursive script of everyday Egyptians, don't belong to grand temple rituals or royal decrees. They're the desperate pleas of farmers begging for rain, lovelorn youths crafting charms, and merchants invoking protection for their wares. One spell, etched in the 2nd century, instructs how to fashion a wax ibis to hex a rival's business, while another offers a chant to soothe colicky babies, blending invocations to Thoth with practical herbology. This wasn't superstition on the fringe. It was the spiritual heartbeat of a society where the divine and the domestic lived side by side. What's startling isn't just the content of these spells, but how they rewrite our understanding of ancient spirituality. For centuries, Egypt's religious legacy was defined by pyramids and pharaohs, as if only priests and kings communed with the gods. The demotic texts shatter that illusion. A love spell from Oxyrhynchus doesn't appeal to lofty cosmic forces. It name-drops local divinities like the crocodile god Ptisachos, worshipped in backwater shrines. Another fragment, stained with oil from anxious fingers, lists prices for magical services, proving even the supernatural had a marketplace. These weren't sacred scriptures guarded in vaults. They were folded into pockets, tucked under pillows, passed between neighbors like recipes for bread. The real revelation lies in the hybrid nature of these incantations. A single spell might weave together Egyptian deities, Greek philosophical terms, and Babylonian astrological references, a spiritual remix reflecting the cultural blender of Greco-Roman Egypt. Consider the Mithra's Liturgy, a demotic text that merged Persian sun god imagery with Egyptian underworld geography, promising initiates a celestial journey past snarling demons and flaming gates. This wasn't chaos, it was cosmopolitanism, proving everyday people were far more theologically flexible than historians assumed. While elites debated doctrine in Alexandria's libraries, the masses were crafting a lived religion as eclectic as their bustling, multicultural world. Yet for all their vividness, these spells nearly vanished forever. Unlike temple inscriptions carved in stone, these fragile papyri survived by sheer luck, discarded in rubbish heaps, stuffed inside mummy casings, or repurposed as scrap paper. Their casualness condemned them to obscurity. Who saves a grocery list or a scribbled hex? But that's precisely what makes them priceless. They capture the anxieties and hopes of people history usually ignores. The weaver afraid of the evil eye, the mother whispering over a sick child's crib, the sailor painting protective symbols on his boat's prow. These spells weren't about cosmic truths, they were about making it through the week. The tragedy is how much we've lost. For every demotic spell deciphered today, hundreds crumbled to dust, their everyday magic forgotten. What incantations were murmured over childbirth beds or whispered in taverns? What folk remedies blended medicine and mysticism? The spells we have are mere fragments of a vibrant, vanished world where the sacred wasn't separate from life. It was the thread stitching it all together. As we pore over these texts, we're not just translating words, we're overhearing the intimate conversations of people who believed the divine was always within reach, as close as a muttered charm or a handful of herbs. And that might be the most enchanting spell of all, the one that conjures the past back to life. The Sibyls spoke in riddles that shaped empires not just in Rome, but across the ancient Mediterranean world. These women, perched on tripods in sacred caves or temples, inhaled volcanic fumes or chewed laurel leaves to induce prophetic trances, their voices trembling with words they claimed came straight from the gods. The most famous, the Cumaean Sibyl, allegedly sold 9 books of prophecies to Rome's last king. But what about the dozens of other Sibyls whose predictions vanished into the shadows of history? The Greeks revered the Sibyl of Delphi, whose cryptic verses guided everything from crop planting to naval battles. The Etruscans had their own prophetic women, the Vegoia, who dictated sacred laws on bronze tablets. Even the Hebrews wrote of a mysterious Babylonian Sibyl named Sambeth, whose lost oracles some believe influenced Jewish apocalyptic texts. Consider the fragments that survived by chance. A Greek traveler in the 2nd century recorded one Sibyl's warning: "You will know the sign when rivers flow backward and the sky rains ash." Centuries later, geologists found evidence of a cataclysmic volcanic eruption on Thera that matches the description, proof these women might have preserved folk memories of real disasters. Another snippet, preserved in a Byzantine manuscript, speaks of iron birds that carry death in their bellies, a phrase that sends chills down modern spines. Were these genuine premonitions or just lucky metaphors? The answer matters less than the sheer weight of their cultural impact. Cities rose or fell based on Sibylline advice. Wars were delayed, temples built, and dynasties toppled because a woman in a trance whispered a handful of ambiguous lines. The real tragedy lies in how much was lost. Roman historians mention Sibylline archives in Antioch and Unearthing, filled with prophecies on fragile papyrus. The Carthaginians allegedly consulted their own Sibyl before Hannibal crossed the Alps, but her words perished when Rome salted their city's ruins. Even the famed Sibyl of Cumae might have left more than those 9 books. Virgil's Aeneid describes her cave as stacked with thousands of verses on oak leaves, each one a potential alternate future scattered by the wind before anyone could read it. What cosmic insights, what warnings about plagues or comets or social upheavals might have been swept away in those gusts? Perhaps the most tantalizing gap is the Sibyl's role as a rare female voice in male-dominated antiquity. Unlike priests or kings, Sibyls derived authority not from lineage or appointment, but from perceived divine inspiration. Their very existence challenged hierarchies. A shepherd's daughter could suddenly speak with the authority of Apollo. No wonder early Christian writers co-opted them, inventing the Tiburtine Sibyl, who supposedly foretold Christ's birth. It was a clever way to absorb their power while neutralizing the threat of uncontrolled female prophecy. The silence of these lost oracles leaves us with a haunting question. How much ancient wisdom was dismissed because it came from the lips of women? The Sibyls remind us that history isn't just shaped by battles and treaties, but by the whispers we choose to hear and those we let fade into the dark. The fragments we've recovered, scorched scrolls, palimpsests whispering beneath prayers, codices buried in jars, are more than historical curiosities. They're the torn pages of humanity's diary, proof that history isn't a single story but a chorus of voices, some silenced for centuries. Every time a new manuscript surfaces, it's like lighting a candle in a vast, forgotten library. The Dead Sea Scrolls rewrote our understanding of Judaism's evolution. The Nag Hammadi texts revealed a Christianity that might have been. The Dresden Codex proved the Maya mapped the cosmos with precision that humbles modern astronomy. These aren't just artifacts, they're time machines, transporting us back to moments when the future of human thought hung in the balance. Yet for every text we've saved, countless others have crumbled to dust, burned by conquerors, dissolved by damp, or simply lost to indifference. The Library of Alexandria's 500,000 scrolls vanished in flames, taking with them the works of Aristotle, treatises on medicine from ancient Memphis, and star charts from Babylon. The Cathar texts were methodically erased by crusaders, leaving only ashes and echoes. Even now, manuscripts languish in museum basements, their scripts too faded or cryptic to decipher. Each loss is a door slammed shut on some corner of the human experience, a conversation cut off mid-sentence. The irony is profound. We live in an age of information overload, yet we're still piecing together the intellectual foundations of our civilization. Modern technology offers hope. Multispectral imaging resurrects ink erased centuries ago. AI compares unknown scripts to every known language, teasing out patterns invisible to the human eye. In 2014, physicists used particle accelerators to read carbonized Herculaneum scrolls without unrolling them, a technique that could unlock entire libraries preserved by volcanic ash. Who knows what we'll find next? A complete copy of the Book of Thoth in some overlooked tomb, the lost dialogues of Pythagoras, whispered to have contained the music of the spheres. Every undiscovered text is a potential earthquake for history, religion, even science. But this quest isn't just about filling gaps in textbooks, it's about humility. Each rediscovered manuscript reminds us how much we don't know, how the past was richer, stranger, and more diverse than our simplified narratives suggest. The Gospel of Judas forces us to reconsider betrayal. The Ora Linda book dares us to imagine a matriarchal Bronze Age Europe. Even the baffling Voinish manuscript, with its unreadable script and alien botany, whispers that there are still mysteries we haven't cracked. These texts challenge the arrogance of hindsight, proving that our ancestors weren't primitive, they were asking the same existential questions we are, just through different lenses. The real legacy of these sacred texts isn't just in their words, but in the questions they force us to ask. Who decides what's sacred, whose voices get preserved, and whose are erased? As we stand on the brink of deciphering more lost knowledge than ever before, we're not just uncovering history, we're being handed a mirror. What will we do with these recovered voices? Will we listen, even when they unsettle our deepest beliefs? The next great discovery might be sitting in a jar in some desert cave, or mislabeled in a monastery archive, waiting to rewrite another chapter of our story. And when it surfaces, it won't just change what we know about the past, it might change how we see ourselves. The search continues because every lost text is a piece of us, waiting